Egypt sleeps without permission from kings, as stars remain. Indifferent heat fades slowly, and history waits outside, learning once again that the night never belonged to dynasties. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you're welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now, rest. Night arrives in Egypt without checking a calendar or consulting a court historian. It does not pause to ask which dynasty holds the seal this year or whose name was most recently carved into stone with the confidence that it would last forever. Darkness simply settles the way it always has, as if power were an interesting rumor, but not a requirement for sleep. The land exhales, heat that spent the entire day pressing itself into walls, floors, and bodies, loosens its grip slowly, reluctantly, like something that knows it will be back tomorrow, and therefore sees no need to rush. Sand that burned the soles of feet only hours ago begins to cool, grain by grain, not dramatically, not evenly, but patiently. This process has never needed a ruler's approval. It predates crowns and will outlast them with polite indifference. Above it all, stars appear. They do not announce themselves. They do not realign to celebrate a reign or mourn its end. They take their positions because it is time, because gravity and distance and habit say so. Some of these lights were already old when the first monuments tried to explain eternity. They shine tonight without the slightest awareness that someone below might be counting years. If they had opinions, which they do not, they would likely find dynasties inefficient. In the village, life contracts rather than stops. Sounds soften, voices lower, a door closes with the familiarity of a gesture repeated thousands of times. Someone stretches out on a rooftop not for symbolism, but because the air moves better there. Another listens to the wind slip through narrow paths between buildings carrying dust, warmth, and the quiet assurance that nothing urgent is required right now. The wind does not deliver messages. It has never been a reliable messenger. It moves because movement is its nature, not because history is happening. Inside the houses, the day is slowly released. Walls give back the heat they borrowed. Shadows stretch and then lose interest. Lamps glow briefly and then dim, not as an act of poverty or ritual, but because eyes grow heavy. A child resists sleep with the seriousness of someone who believes staying awake might matter. An older body welcomes rest without commentary. Neither of them is thinking about emperors. Neither of them needs to. This is the quiet truth the night reveals. Egypt does not depend on being observed to continue. It does not require constant narration. Fields rest, water settles in channels, tools wait exactly where they were set down, confident they will be needed again. Even the desert beyond the village participates in this agreement. It cools faster than the cultivated land and holds the cold with something like pride. Footprints remain briefly, then fade, not as a lesson, but as maintenance. Memory here is temporary by design. History prefers daylight because daylight allows things to be pointed at. Night refuses to cooperate. It erases outlines. It smooths differences. It reduces grand ideas to the scale of breathing bodies and cooling earth. In this darkness, the concept of dynasty feels faintly unnecessary, like a title announced after everyone has already left the room. There is something gently ironic about a civilization so often associated with permanence finding its truest continuity in moments like this, not in monuments or ceremonies, but in the repeated act of lying down and allowing the world to go quiet. Sleep becomes the most democratic experience available. Kings and farmers surrender to it in the same posture, at the same pace, under the same sky. Egypt tonight does not perform greatness. It does not rehearse legacy. It simply rests, trusting that morning will come, whether it is recorded or not. And for now, that is enough. The stars appear without ceremony, which is perhaps their most consistent habit. They do not rise in response to drums or proclamations. No trumpet sounds when the first light pierces the dark. They simply arrive one by one, then in clusters, then in a quiet excess that feels almost unnecessary. Egypt has seen this arrangement so many times that no one expects novelty from it. The sky does not improvise. Above the villages and fields of 300 AD, the stars hold their places with an untroubled confidence. They are not aligned to honor rulers, and they do not shift when power changes hands. If a dynasty rises, the stars do not lean in for a closer look. If one collapses, they do not dim out of respect. Their distance is complete. It is not indifference in the human sense. It is something older, cleaner, and far less personal. People notice them anyway. They always have. Not because the stars demand attention, but because night encourages looking upward when the ground offers fewer distractions. A farmer lying on a roof after a long day might trace familiar patterns without naming them. A traveler pausing outside the village might use them to orient himself, not philosophically, but practically. Direction matters. Meaning is optional. Names for these stars exist, of course. They have always existed. Humans cannot resist naming things that refuse to speak back. Yet those names change, slide, and disappear. The lights remain. Tonight, the sky above Egypt is carrying stories from a dozen cultures at once, layered and incomplete, none of them fully correct, none of them required. The stars have never corrected anyone. There is a quiet irony here that the night never points out. Dynasties obsess over continuity. They engrave lists, genealogies, and dates with the hope that sequence itself will grant importance. The stars offer continuity without documentation. They do not need scribes. They do not need to be defended against revision. Their presence is so reliable that it almost becomes invisible, which may be the most durable form of endurance. In the stillness of the late evening, as the last heat finally releases its grip on stone and skin, the sky becomes impossibly deep. Not dramatic, just deep. It creates a sense of scale that gently reduces everything else. Villages feel smaller, ambitions shrink without protest. Even fear softens. It is difficult to panic under a sky that has already outlived every known cause for panic. Someone might glance upward and feel something close to humility, though that word suggests intention, and the night does not encourage intention. It simply offers perspective and lets the observer decide whether to accept it. Many do not. They look, then return to their thoughts, which remain stubbornly human. The stars do not mind. They are not here to persuade. In 300 AD, Egypt exists in a world of overlapping authorities. Roman administration presses lightly or heavily depending on location. Local power structures persist because they always have. Religion, language, and habit braid together without asking permission. The stars witness all of this without recording it. They do not sort eras into categories. To them, the difference between before and after is negligible. What they offer instead is rhythm. Night follows day, stars follow darkness. Their pattern is so stable that it allows everything else to be unstable without causing collapse. Crops fail, governments change, roads shift. The sky remains an anchor, not because it promises order, but because it refuses to participate in disorder. This refusal is subtle. It does not announce itself as resistance. The stars do not glow brighter when rulers make mistakes. They do not blink in warning. Their detachment is complete, and in that detachment, there is a kind of mercy. No one is being watched closely enough to feel judged. No one is being remembered against their will. For people trying to sleep, this matters more than philosophy ever could. A stable sky reassures the body before it reassures the mind. Breathing slows, muscles release. The night air cools further. Somewhere a dog shifts position and settles again. Somewhere else water reflects starlight in a pattern that will vanish as soon as the surface moves. Nothing here is trying to be permanent. The stars are permanent enough for everyone. It is tempting from a distance to imagine ancient people as constantly searching the sky for meaning. The reality is quieter. Most nights, the stars are simply there, like walls or roads or familiar hills. They are part of the background architecture of existence. Only occasionally do they become symbolic. Most of the time, they are functional. They mark time. They offer orientation. They remind travelers that the world continues beyond the edge of the village. This functionality is what dynasties never fully understand. Power thrives on attention. It requires visibility, reinforcement, repetition. The stars operate on the opposite principle. They persist by doing nothing new. Their authority, if it can be called that, comes from refusal rather than assertion. As the night deepens, fewer eyes remain open to notice them. Sleep claims its quiet territory. Roofs empty. Courtyards fall silent. Lamps go dark one by one. The stars continue regardless, now mostly unobserved, carrying on their ancient agreement with gravity and distance. They have never required an audience. In this way, the night sky above Egypt performs its most important function. It allows the land to rest without commentary. It provides a ceiling that does not press down, a presence that does not demand loyalty. Dynasties may come and go, but the stars remain professionally uninterested. And so Egypt sleeps beneath them, not as a kingdom, not as a province, not as an idea, but as a place where bodies grow tired and recover, where heat fades, where tomorrow is expected but not rehearsed. The stars keep watch without watching, holding their positions as they always have, patiently waiting for nothing at all. Heat is the last thing to leave Egypt at night. It does not bow when the sun disappears, and it does not accept the idea that darkness should immediately fix everything. The heat stays where it was placed during the day, lodged into stone and soil, pressed into skin, lingering in the quiet corners of rooms that thought they were done working. Night arrives, yes, but heat insists on finishing its sentence. In 300 AD, everyone understands this. It is not surprising. No one stands up at sunset expecting comfort to arrive on time. The land has taught patience as a survival skill. Walls made of mud brick hold warmth like a memory they are reluctant to release. Floors radiate the day back into bare feet. Even air seems slower, thicker, as if deciding whether it truly wants to move. Egypt does not cool down dramatically. It cools down honestly. This is where power quietly fails. Rulers can command people, they can collect taxes, enforce schedules, redraw borders, and declare new eras. What they cannot do is order heat to leave faster. The warmth left behind by the sun does not recognize authority. It does not respond to titles. It does not speed up for announcements. It follows physics with the calm confidence of something that has never needed persuasion. People adjust instead. They always have. Doors remain open longer. Bodies spread out across rooftops and courtyards, not for romance, not for symbolism, but because heat obeys geometry. Higher places breathe better. Narrow spaces trap yesterday. The night becomes a practical exercise in understanding how warmth behaves. No ideology improves this knowledge. Only experience does. Somewhere, a person lies awake longer than planned, waiting for the heat to loosen its grip. Thoughts drift without urgency. Tomorrow exists, but it does not feel close yet. The body insists on its own timing. Sleep cannot be forced any more than cooling can. This is not a failure of discipline. It is an agreement with reality. Heat has a way of flattening distinctions. Rich and poor experience it similarly once night arrives. The difference between elaborate and modest housing shrinks when both are still holding on to the afternoon. This is not justice exactly, but it is equality of sensation. Power does not insulate against temperature. Titles do not create shade after dark. The sand beyond the village begins to cool more quickly than the built spaces. It releases heat in long sighs, each grain performing its own small surrender. The desert has always been better at letting go. It has less invested in permanence. Fields and houses, by contrast, try to hold on because they were made to serve human needs, and human needs are often slow to fade. There is a quiet lesson here that no one announces. Heat outlasting daylight is not a metaphor. It is a condition. The world does not reset when visibility changes. Consequences linger. Energy takes time to move. The night does not erase the day. It negotiates with it. In the broader sense, this is how history behaves as well. Power does not vanish the moment it loses relevance. It lingers in structures, habits, expectations. Even after authority shifts, the residue remains, warming walls that no longer belong to anyone in particular. The difference is that heat eventually dissipates without argument. Power rarely does. But tonight, Egypt is not interested in that comparison. The night does not ask the land to reflect. It allows it to cool. The process is slow enough to notice if one is awake, gentle enough to ignore if one is not. Heat recedes by degrees, not declarations. Somewhere in the dark, a breeze passes briefly through an opening and offers relief that lasts just long enough to be appreciated. Then it moves on. No one complains. Relief was never promised. It was borrowed. As the hours pass, the temperature continues its quiet descent. Bodies relax in response, muscles easing when the air finally cooperates. Sleep arrives unevenly, but it arrives. Not because the night demanded it, but because the conditions finally allow it. Comfort is negotiated, not commanded. What remains remarkable is how ordinary this all feels. There is no sense that anything important is happening. No one frames the cooling of stone as an event. No one marks the moment when heat finally loosens its grip entirely. It simply happens, unnoticed, like most necessary things. Dynasties would prefer drama. They benefit from clear transitions, sharp edges, decisive moments. Heat offers none of this. It fades gradually, stubbornly, without caring who might want credit for the change. The land cools because it cools. Power watches, helpless. From a distance it does not admit exists. By the deepest part of the night, Egypt has reached a balance, not cold, not comfortable in the modern sense, but tolerable, enough to rest, enough to forget the day without denying it ever happened. This balance is temporary, and everyone knows it. The sun will return. Heat will rebuild its presence methodically. Nothing about this cycle suggests permanence, and that is precisely why it works. The irony remains gentle and unspoken. The forces that shape daily life most reliably are the ones least interested in being remembered. Heat does not leave inscriptions. Cooling does not require witnesses. They operate whether anyone records them or not. Egypt sleeps in this negotiated calm, suspended between what was absorbed and what is slowly released. The night holds the space while the land finishes its work. Power has nothing useful to add. Wind does not arrive in Egypt with a destination in mind. It does not check borders. It does not adjust its pace to suit settlements. And it does not pause out of respect for anything built by human hands. When it moves because pressure shifts somewhere far beyond the horizon, because the desert breathes unevenly, because the world is never as still as it pretends to be at night. In 300 AD, this wind is familiar. It is not welcomed or feared. It is recognized the way one recognizes a recurring sound that never quite becomes background noise. People do not look up to see it. They feel it instead brushing across skin, sliding through doorways, left intentionally open, stirring dust that had only just settled after the day finally released its heat. The wind does not announce change. It simply passes through and leaves the air slightly rearranged. What makes the desert wind remarkable is not its strength, which is often modest at night, but its refusal to belong anywhere. It does not originate from a capital. It does not radiate outward from authority. It crosses villages and fields, an empty land without distinction, touching everything lightly and staying nowhere long enough to be claimed. Power has always struggled with this kind of movement. Walls are built to stop things. Borders are drawn to contain them. Titles exist to fix responsibility in place. Wind ignores all of this with professional ease. It slips through the narrowest gaps, finds weaknesses no one noticed, and reminds the land that control is always partial. This reminder is never dramatic. It is delivered gently, repeatedly, until resistance becomes impractical. As night deepens, the wind becomes more noticeable not because it grows stronger, but because everything else grows quieter. Human sound withdraws. Tools stop clinking. Voices disappear into sleep. What remains is the subtle movement of air, negotiating with structures that were never meant to last forever. Palm leaves whisper because they cannot help it. Loose fabric shifts. Sand rearranges itself grain by grain, then pretends it was always that way. For those still awake, the wind offers brief relief from the lingering warmth. It cools skin unevenly, favoring one side of the body, then another. It does not promise comfort. It offers moments. This is enough. Comfort in Egypt has always been temporary, and everyone understands the value of not demanding more than what is available. The wind carries no scent of politics. It does not smell different under different rulers. It does not carry loyalty in its particles. If it passes over a tax office or a temple or a home, it treats them equally, brushing past with the same level of interest, which is to say very little. This indifference is not hostile. It is efficient. There is a temptation, especially when speaking of deserts, to imagine the wind as a messenger. Stories encourage this idea. Songs rely on it. But tonight, the wind brings nothing. No warning, no promise, no memory. It carries only the evidence of distance, the suggestion that somewhere far away, the land is shaped differently and that difference is exerting pressure here. People adjust their bodies instinctively when the wind passes. A shoulder turns, a blanket shifts, an arm moves to catch the cooler air. These are not conscious decisions. They are responses learned over generations. No ruler taught them. No decree enforced them. The wind trained bodies slowly through repetition. Outside the village, the open desert receives the wind without resistance. Nothing stands in its way long enough to matter. Dunes soften and sharpen in response, never fixed, never finished. The desert does not remember its previous shape, and the wind does not care to remind it. Together they maintain a landscape that resists ownership. This resistance is quiet. It does not stage rebellions. It does not topple monuments overnight. It erodes instead, which is far more effective over time. Wind is patient. It understands that permanence is an exaggeration, and it is willing to wait for the world to admit this. In the context of history, this kind of patience is unsettling. Dynasties rely on visible continuity. They want stability that can be pointed to, mapped, and cited. Wind undermines this by making change invisible. Nothing appears to happen, and yet everything is slightly different by morning. During the night, as the air continues to move, Egypt feels less enclosed. Heat disperses further. The sky feels closer. The boundary between inside and outside blurs. Houses are no longer complete barriers, but filters. The wind chooses its path without consultation, reminding every structure that it is temporary shelter, not final authority. Sleep deepens as the night progresses. Those who were restless earlier finally settle. Breathing synchronizes with the cooler air. Dreams form without awareness of the wind that helped make them possible. No one thanks it. Gratitude is unnecessary for things that simply do what they do. The wind continues after most eyes have closed. It moves across empty paths, through palm groves, over irrigation channels reflecting starlight briefly before the surface breaks again. It does not pause to observe its effect. Observation would slow it down, and wind has no interest in slowing down. By the later hours of the night, the desert wind becomes part of the night's structure. It is no longer an interruption, but a component. Like darkness and cooling and silence, it contributes to the conditions that allow rest to exist. Without it, the night would feel heavier, more stagnant. With it, the air remains alive. This aliveness is subtle. It does not inspire poetry in the moment. It inspires sleep. That is its greatest achievement. Wind does not seek to be admired. It seeks equilibrium. In this way, the desert wind offers a quiet counterpoint to human systems. Where power demands allegiance, wind demands nothing. Where authority fixes itself in place, wind remains mobile. Where history insists on being recorded, wind erases tracks without apology. Egypt, lying beneath the stars and within the slow movement of air, does not need to choose between these forces. It accommodates them. It has learned that survival depends less on control and more on adjustment. Wind passes. Egypt remains. Not because it resists, but because it yields just enough. As the night nears its deepest point, the wind softens again, as if satisfied with its work. The air settles into a cooler balance. Sand rests in its new arrangement. Houses stand quietly, altered in ways too small to notice but too real to deny. Nothing announces the change. Morning will come later and bring with it new heat, new stillness, new movement. The wind will return when conditions call for it, not when anyone asks. It will pass through Egypt again without loyalty, without memory, without expectation. And Egypt will accept it as it always has, knowing that the most reliable forces are often the least interested in being obeyed. Night settles into the village without asking whether anything important happened today. It does not check news. It does not care if borders shifted or officials changed. The village receives the night the way it always has, with doors left slightly open, with bodies rearranging themselves toward cooler air, with a shared understanding that tomorrow will arrive whether anyone prepares for it or not. These villages in Egypt, around 300 AD, are not frozen in time, but they are steady. Their steadiness does not come from tradition as an idea. It comes from repetition. People do the same things at night because those things have proven useful. When the heat finally loosens, families move outward into courtyards or onto rooftops, not for ceremony, for comfort. This choice has been made so many times that it no longer feels like a choice at all. Inside the village, sound reduces itself, not all at once. A conversation trails off, footsteps fade, something is set down and not picked up again. Animals settle with the efficiency of creatures that understand energy better than ambition. Even silence arrives gradually, negotiated, rather than imposed. What is striking is how little of this requires explanation. No one narrates the process, no one records it. The village does not need to remember how it sleeps. It simply repeats the act. Memory here is stored in bodies, not texts, in hands that know where to place objects in the dark, in feet that move through narrow paths without needing to look, in backs that find familiar positions against walls worn smooth by generations of similar rest. Power rarely reaches this level. It operates at a distance through orders and systems and symbols. Nighttime village life exists below that distance in a layer where authority becomes irrelevant. Taxes are not collected at this hour. Decrees do not circulate. Even fear tends to grow tired and lie down. A child turns restlessly, half awake, half dreaming, resisting sleep without knowing why. An older person remains awake longer, listening not for danger, but for reassurance. The sounds of the village are enough. Nothing unusual is happening. That is the signal that everything is fine. Outside the houses, paths run between structures without lamps or markers. They are known because they are walked daily. Darkness does not erase them. It reveals how unnecessary visibility often is. People move carefully, confidently, guided by memory rather than sight. This kind of navigation is invisible to history, which prefers maps. But it is essential to survival. In these villages, night is not an interruption, it is a continuation under different conditions. Work pauses, but life does not. Cooking has finished, but eating has not fully faded from memory. Hands still smell faintly of grain or water or earth. These traces linger into sleep, reminding the body what it did today, without demanding pride or regret. The architecture of the village reflects this rhythm. Walls are thick not to impress, but to regulate temperature. Openings are placed not for symmetry, but for airflow. Roofs are flat because flat roofs allow people to sleep where air moves more freely. None of this is symbolic. It is practical knowledge, refined over centuries of trial and discomfort. If dynasties change, these structures do not. Or rather, they change slowly, invisibly, adapting one adjustment at a time. A wall repaired, a roof reinforced, a doorway narrowed or widened slightly. The village evolves without marking the evolution. It does not announce progress, it simply continues. This continuation is the quiet core of Egypt's endurance. Empires arrive and leave, but villages persist because they do not try to be anything else. They do not chase novelty. They do not compete for relevance. They exist because people need places to live, to rest, to sleep. Night exposes this truth gently. When the noise of the day withdraws, what remains is not ideology but infrastructure, not belief but habit. The village breathes collectively, each household contributing to a rhythm that no one coordinates and no one controls. Somewhere, a lamp remains lit longer than necessary, not out of fear but out of comfort. Someone else extinguishes theirs earlier, trusting the night. These differences do not matter. Uniformity is not required. What matters is that the village accommodates variation without breaking. The desert beyond remains present but not threatening. Its openness contrasts with the closeness of the village. One offers vastness, the other offers shelter. At night, this balance feels appropriate. No one envies the desert. No one fears it either. It exists. And that is enough. The village has learned not to demand more from the night than it can give. It does not ask for drama or revelation. It asks only for cooler air, relative quiet, and enough darkness to make sleep possible. The night delivers these things unevenly, imperfectly, and consistently. History rarely notices this consistency. It prefers moments of rupture, but villages are built to survive long stretches of nothing happening. Night after night that looks nearly identical is not a failure of imagination. It is a success of design. As sleep deepens, the village becomes less a collection of individuals and more a single organism at rest. Breathing patterns overlap. Stillness spreads, even dreams seem to respect the shared quiet. Nothing urgent remains. This is how Egypt sleeps when no one is watching closely. Not as a spectacle, not as a symbol, as a system that has learned what it needs and refuses to complicate it. The same movements, the same adjustments, the same acceptance will occur tomorrow night and the night after that, regardless of who claims authority during the day. Villages do not pledge loyalty to dynasties. They pledge loyalty to survival. And so the village rests, carrying forward a way of sleeping that does not belong to any ruler, any year, or any name. It belongs only to the people who repeat it and to the night that allows it to continue without interruption. After the village settles and sleep takes hold, the ground begins its own work. Sand does not rest the way people do. It transitions. All day it absorbed heat without complaint, holding it close, storing it in countless grains pressed together by habit and gravity. Now with the sun gone and the sky deepening, the sand begins to release what it borrowed. This release is quiet. There is no signal to mark the moment it begins. No visible boundary between hot and cool. The temperature shifts slowly enough that only the most patient body would notice. Bare feet, pressed into the sand, feel the change first. What burned earlier now warms gently, then less so, then becomes neutral. Comfort here is not a destination. It is a passing condition. In 300 AD, the land around Egypt's villages behaves the same way it always has. Fields cool unevenly depending on moisture. Paths cool faster where feet have packed the surface tight. Open stretches of desert release heat more freely, unburdened by walls, or water, or human design. The ground does not coordinate this process. Each patch cools according to its own circumstances. Sand does not care about symmetry. It does not aim for balance. It responds to physics without ambition. This is why it has endured, not because it resists change, but because it accepts it without memory. Footprints pressed into the sand during the day remain briefly visible. Some belong to people returning home, some to animals moving between shadows. Some overlap in ways that suggest community without intention. By night, these marks begin to soften. Edges blur. Depth shallows. The sand makes no effort to preserve evidence. This erasure is not aggressive. It is maintenance. The desert cannot afford to remember everything. Memory would weigh it down, so it lets go. Wind helps when it passes, but even without wind, cooling alone is enough. The grains shift microscopically as they contract, settling into arrangements that look deliberate but are not. If someone were awake and paying attention, they might notice how the ground feels different at different hours of the night. Early evening warmth lingers. Later, the sand becomes cool enough to pull heat from the body. This exchange is gentle. The ground takes what the day left behind, then offers relief without negotiation. There is something deeply unsentimental about this process. Sand does not commemorate the day that just ended. It does not care whether the day was ordinary or historic. It cools the same way, regardless. The sun could have illuminated a triumph or a disaster. The sand responds only to temperature. This is why the land often outlasts stories about it. Stories depend on memory. Sand depends on balance. It forgets so that it can continue functioning. Beyond the village where cultivation ends and open desert begins, the cooling is more pronounced. The lack of moisture allows heat to escape quickly. The surface temperature drops sharply. Animals accustomed to this rhythm adjust instinctively, shifting positions, tucking limbs closer, conserving warmth. No one teaches them this. The land teaches them by repeating itself. There is no hierarchy in this cooling. No area is favored, no path is spared. Even places associated with power receive no special treatment. Grounds near administrative buildings cool like any other. Stones do not retain authority longer than they retain heat. If power had a texture, it would want to resist this leveling. It would want certain spaces to remain warm, active, significant. The land refuses. It treats everything as surface. Everything is subject to the same release. By the middle of the night, the sand has given up most of what it held. What remains is a steady coolness that stabilizes the air above it. Breezes feel cleaner now, sharper. The ground supports sleep, not by softness, but by predictability. It will not surprise the body. This predictability is the foundation of rest. When the ground behaves reliably, the mind follows. There is no need for vigilance, no sudden shifts, no tricks. The land communicates safety, not through signals, but through consistency. The desert has practiced this consistency for longer than any civilization has practiced writing. Its knowledge is not stored in records, it is stored in repetition. Day heats, night cools, sand absorbs, sand releases. Nothing about this cycle is impressive. That is its strength. For historians, this cycle is invisible. It does not leave artifacts, it does not produce ruins, yet it supports everything else. Without cooling nights, bodies fail. Crops suffer. Villages empty. Dynasties collapse for reasons that will later be described as political or military, but which often begin with environmental exhaustion. Tonight, however, there is no exhaustion. The cycle is intact. The land performs its role without error. Cooling proceeds. Balance returns. Somewhere near the edge of the village, a person sleeping outdoors shifts slightly as the ground cools beneath them. A blanket is adjusted. A limb is drawn closer. These movements are small, automatic, unrecorded. They are agreements with the land, renegotiated nightly. By the deepest hour before dawn, the sand is fully cool. It has completed its work. What happens next will belong to the morning. Heat will return. Absorption will begin again. The sand does not anticipate this. Anticipation would be a kind of memory, and memory is not its task. The night ends without ceremony. The land rests in its cooled state, briefly neutral, briefly balanced. No one marks the moment. No one needs to. Sand has done what it always does. It has made rest possible by forgetting the day. Houses do not sleep when people do. They never have. Long after bodies settle and breathing evens out, the structures remain awake in their own quiet way, still holding on to what the day pressed into them, still processing the hours they were required to absorb. In Egypt especially, night does not begin with instant relief. It begins with negotiation, and houses are deeply involved in that process. Throughout the day, walls accepted heat without protest. Sunlight struck them directly, then indirectly, then reflected back again from the ground below. Stone and mud brick took this warmth into themselves, layer by layer, storing it not because they intended to, but because that is what dense materials do. By evening, every surface had become a record of exposure, not a memory in the human sense, but a condition. Now, in the long hours after sunset, houses begin to undo that condition. They do not empty themselves all at once. That would be uncomfortable, even dangerous. Instead, they release the day slowly, the way the land does, in increments small enough to be tolerated. One wall cools before another. One room becomes livable while the next still resists. Corners lag behind. Ceilings behave differently than floors. The house is not a single object, but a collection of responses. People have learned to live inside this unevenness. They do not expect consistency. They know which side of the house cools first. They know which surfaces can still burn skin hours after sunset. They arrange themselves accordingly, without discussion, without reflection. These choices are older than most recorded instructions. They are habits passed down through survival, not teaching. As night deepens, houses begin to release more than heat. They release the sounds of the day. Walls that echoed footsteps and voices gradually absorb silence. The sharpness of noise dulls. The interior grows thicker, quieter, as if padded by time itself. This silence is not absolute. It is layered, textured, filled with small residual sounds that feel familiar rather than intrusive. Smells linger longer: cooked grain, oil, dust, sweat, all remain suspended in the air, softened by cooling temperatures. Houses do not purge these traces immediately. They allow them to disperse slowly, mixing with night air until they lose their edges. This gradual fading is part of the house's function. Abrupt erasure would be unsettling. Continuity, even of scent, is calming. The architecture itself supports this process. Thick walls delay change. Small openings control airflow. Roofs built flat invite night air, while still holding the memory of the sun. None of this was designed for beauty. It was designed for survival. Aesthetic judgment comes later, if at all. The house exists to regulate extremes, not to eliminate them. There is a point late in the evening when the interior finally becomes neutral, not cool, not warm, simply tolerable. This moment is never announced. It arrives unnoticed, and only afterward does the body realize it has stopped adjusting. Movement slows. Restlessness fades. Sleep deepens not because the night demands it, but because the house finally allows it. What matters here is that no authority controls this process. No decree can speed it up. No wealth can bypass it entirely. Larger houses hold more heat. Smaller ones release it faster, but all participate in the same exchange. The physics are impartial. Power cannot negotiate with thermal mass. This is where houses quietly undermine the idea of hierarchy. During the day, differences are visible. Space, ornament, location, all signal status. At night, these differences soften. Everyone waits for walls to cool. Everyone responds to the same stubborn delay. The house equalizes experience without intention. Outside, the village remains dark and still, but inside each house is performing its own slow transition. Heat continues to migrate outward. Air continues to circulate unevenly. Materials adjust to the absence of direct sunlight. Nothing dramatic occurs, yet everything necessary is happening. Houses do not record this work. They leave no mark of having done it. Tomorrow they will begin again, absorbing heat, holding sound, containing activity. The cycle does not improve with repetition. It does not evolve toward perfection. It simply repeats, reliably enough to support life. Late in the night, when the land has cooled and the wind has softened, houses reach a point of completion. They have released nearly everything they were holding. What remains is a stable interior environment that asks nothing of the body. At this stage, the house ceases to be noticeable. It becomes background, which is its highest achievement. Sleep deepens most fully when the environment stops changing. Houses understand this without knowing it. Their role is to change slowly till they no longer need to change at all. Once that state is reached, rest becomes effortless. This is not permanence. Morning will undo it. Heat will return. Walls will store again. The house will repeat the same quiet labor tomorrow. But for now, during these hours, it has done enough. There is something profoundly unheroic about this. Houses do not aspire, they do not symbolize, they function, and in functioning they sustain everything else. Egypt sleeps inside these structures without thinking about them. No gratitude is expressed. None is required. Reliability rarely receives thanks. History tends to focus on what is built to be seen. Houses at night are built to be felt instead. Their contribution is not visible, but without it, nothing else would survive long enough to be recorded. As the night approaches its deepest point, houses stand quietly across the village, holding nothing but sleeping bodies and cooled air. They have released the day completely. They wait, empty but ready, for the cycle to begin again. The sky does not arrive to teach humility. It is already there, vast enough that instruction would be redundant. When night fully settles over Egypt, and the houses have finished releasing the day, the sky opens not dramatically, but completely. It becomes larger simply because nothing else competes with it anymore. In 300 AD, this sky has been seen so many times that it no longer surprises anyone. Familiarity does not make it smaller. It only makes it easier to accept. The darkness stretches outward without edge, without emphasis, without concern for how it will be interpreted. It does not invite admiration. It allows observation. What becomes clear under such a sky is not meaning, but proportion. Villages shrink, fields flatten, rivers feel narrower. Even the desert, immense by daylight standards, loses its dominance when placed beneath the full dome of night. Everything earthly becomes contained. Everything human becomes brief. Ambition struggles in this environment. It requires walls, stages, boundaries, points of comparison. The sky removes these gently without confrontation. It does not argue against power. It simply refuses to frame it. Without contrast, importance dissolves. Someone looking up might think of nothing at all. This is common. The sky does not demand reflection. It does not insist on awe. It merely occupies space so thoroughly that thought loses urgency. Concerns that felt solid earlier now feel distant, as if they belong to a smaller world, operating somewhere below. The stars do not help ambition either. They are too numerous, too indifferent, too far removed from consequence. They do not align to favor plans. They do not blink approval. They sit in their places, balanced by forces that do not negotiate. Their scale overwhelms intention without effort. This overwhelming is not violent, it is calming. When the mind encounters something it cannot measure, it often stops trying. Measurement is the first tool of control. The sky removes the possibility politely. Under this sky, history feels optional. Dates lose precision. Eras blur. It becomes difficult to remember which century is being occupied, and easier to remember that centuries are human inventions layered onto a continuity that never asked for them. Egypt beneath the sky does not perform identity. It does not announce itself as ancient or eternal. It simply exists in a position relative to something larger. The relationship is not one of submission or pride. It is one of coexistence. During the day, ambition has space to rehearse. Structures cast shadows that define hierarchy. Movement suggests purpose. Light encourages activity. At night, the sky removes this scaffolding. It offers no direction except up, and up leads nowhere a body can go. This is why night so often quiets the mind, not because it brings answers, but because it removes the conditions that make questions feel urgent. The sky does not solve problems. It reduces their volume. Even rulers, if they were awake and willing to look, would find little encouragement here. Titles feel fragile under a ceiling that has outlasted every known title. Declarations feel temporary when spoken beneath something that does not listen. But the sky does not mock. It does not belittle. It simply remains unchanged. Any sense of irony belongs entirely to the observer. The vastness overhead also alters time. Minutes feel longer, hours stretch without markers. Without daylight to segment activity, the night becomes a continuous field. The sky reinforces this continuity. It does not offer milestones. It does not count progress. This timelessness is deceptive. The stars are moving, the earth is turning. The sky only appears still because the motion is too large to register moment by moment. This illusion of stillness is enough to calm even restless thoughts. Sleep deepens in this environment not because people decide to surrender, but because the conditions no longer support alertness. The sky removes cues for action. There is nothing to pursue, nothing to prepare for immediately. The body understands this before the mind does. Dreams that form under such a sky often lack urgency. They wander, they loop, they dissolve without conclusion. Even the unconscious seems influenced by scale, drifting rather than striving. Outside the villages, the desert reflects the sky's indifference. Its open spaces mirror the overhead vastness, creating a sense of exposure that paradoxically feels safe. Nothing is hiding. Nothing is approaching. The sky does not compress the land. It expands it. This expansion makes ownership feel impractical. Borders dissolve in darkness. Lines drawn during the day disappear entirely. Under the sky, land becomes land again, unmarked and uninterested in claims. It is here in this widened perspective that ambition quietly loses its footing. Without visible progress, without comparison, without audience, desire to dominate feels unnecessary. Not immoral, just unnecessary. The sky does not enforce equality. It makes inequality irrelevant. It does not argue that all things are the same. It demonstrates that all things are small. Egypt has lived under this demonstration for millennia. It has learned not to respond with despair or defiance. It responds with sleep. This sleep is not escape. It is alignment. Bodies align with night. Breath aligns with stillness. Thought aligns with scale. The sky offers a rhythm that requires no participation. When morning eventually arrives, ambition will return. Plans will reform. Power will reassert itself with familiar confidence. But for now, beneath this sky, none of that is necessary. The night does not promise transformation. It promises pause. The sky supports that pause by remaining larger than any intention brought beneath it. And so Egypt rests, framed by a vastness that neither remembers nor anticipates. The sky holds everything without holding on to anything. Night in Egypt is not a metaphor waiting to be decoded. It is a working system that arrives on schedule, performs several quiet tasks, and leaves before anyone can thank it. By 300 AD, the routines of villages and fields have already adapted to this system so deeply that most people barely notice it happening. They do not need to believe in it. They only need to live inside it. The first task of night is reduction. Light withdraws, and with it the need to constantly respond. Colors disappear into a smaller palette. Distance becomes harder to judge. Faces soften into outlines. The world becomes less detailed, which sounds like a loss until you remember how exhausting detail can be. Night reduces decisions. It limits options. It narrows life to what is close, what is necessary, what can be reached by memory rather than by sight. The second task is cooling, not as comfort but as regulation. Heat is energy, and energy must move somewhere. As the ground releases what it stored, air changes density and begins to circulate differently. Breezes slide through gaps, under doorways, across rooftops. This movement is not romance. It is thermodynamics, doing its slow, stubborn work. The village benefits not because it deserves relief, but because it is positioned inside a cycle that repeats, regardless of deserving. The third task is protection, though it is not the protection people usually mean. Darkness makes theft easier, yes, and danger harder to see, but it also hides everyone equally. Night is a curtain that reduces surveillance. It softens the gaze of neighbors and officials and strangers. It allows a person to exist for a few hours without being evaluated, counted, measured, or compared. That is a form of safety that rarely gets named because it does not come from authority. It comes from absence. Night also reorganizes sound. Daytime noise is scattered, made of many small sources moving in different directions. At night, those sources stop, and the remaining sounds become clearer, fewer, more predictable. The wind, the occasional animal, the distant water, the soft creak of wood, settling as temperatures shift. Predictability calms the body. Uncertainty keeps it awake. Night improves predictability simply by removing variables. Then there is the task of synchronizing. During the day, each person follows slightly different timing. Some rise earlier, some later. Some work longer, some stop sooner. Night pushes those differences closer together. Lamps dim around the same hour. Conversations fade. Cooking ends. Paths empty. Breathing slows. It is not forced uniformity. It is convergence created by shared conditions. The sky darkens for everyone. The air cools for everyone. The body responds in similar ways. This is why night matters more than many laws. Laws require enforcement and agreement. Night requires neither. It does not negotiate. It does not explain itself. It simply changes the environment until certain behaviors become easier and others become difficult. Work becomes inconvenient. Rest becomes convenient. Movement becomes slower. Voices become quieter. The system does not punish. It nudges. In Egypt, this system has always been especially clear because the day is so intense. The sun demands effort. It pulls moisture from skin. It brightens every surface and makes every mistake visible. Night undoes that intensity in stages, like a careful reversal. It is not gentle at first. It becomes gentle later. That gradual softening is part of the design. It is tempting to turn night into poetry, to speak about it as if it exists to comfort the mind. But night in a village is also logistics. Someone must decide where to sleep to catch air. Someone must store water where it stays cooler. Someone must keep embers safe so the fire can be revived. Someone must remember to secure animals. These actions are small, repeated, and rarely celebrated, but they are the machinery that keeps the next day possible. Even the human body becomes part of the system. Sleep is not only a personal event, it is maintenance. Muscles repair, the mind reorganizes, hunger resets. If sleep fails, the entire village feels it the next day in slower work, sharper tempers, weaker attention. Night protects productivity without ever mentioning productivity. It offers rest because rest is necessary, not because anyone earned it. The system extends beyond the village into the landscape. Irrigation channels cool. Moist soil holds temperature differently than dry sand. Plants respond by slowing their own processes. Insects adjust. Animals shift patterns. Predators hunt differently. The night is not a stage for humans alone. It is a reconfiguration of the whole environment. When people speak of dynasties and empires, they often imply that human organization is the main structure of life. Night quietly disagrees. It shows another structure, older and more consistent. The empire may claim the land by day, but the night belongs to physics, biology, and habit. No official can revoke darkness. No treasury can buy sunrise early. No proclamation can keep the stars from appearing. There is a mild, almost polite irony in how much effort rulers spend trying to appear permanent, while night proves impermanence every evening. Lamps go out, voices fade, plans pause, even pride sleeps. The system takes the most convinced person and places them flat on their back, breathing slowly, looking ridiculous in the same way everyone looks when they are finally tired enough to stop pretending. If the night is working well, you do not notice it. You notice only the result, the gradual easing of effort. The body stops bracing. The mind stops scanning. The village stops producing sound. The system is successful when it becomes background. In 300 AD, under the broad sky, Egypt is full of these systems layered together. The night system intersects with the house system, the desert cooling system, the wind system, the water system. None of them require belief. They require only that people do what they have learned to do, which is to adjust rather than to control. This adjustment is not passive, it is skilled. It is knowledge built from generations of watching what works. Where to place bedding, when to cover a jar, how to listen for the change in air that signals deeper cooling, when to stop talking, when to let silence finish the sentence. These are not heroic decisions, they are competence. The night system also creates a strange kind of continuity across social lines. People who disagree during the day sleep under the same sky. People with different gods, different languages, different loyalties still share the same cooling air. Night does not reconcile them. It merely places them in the same conditions long enough for conflict to feel temporarily expensive. Sleep is a truce signed by physiology. And because it is a system, night does not care whether anyone appreciates it. It will arrive tomorrow with the same sequence of tasks: reduction, cooling, synchronizing, protection through darkness, reorganization of sound, encouragement of rest. It will do this even if no one writes about it, even if no one remembers. It will continue because the world runs on cycles, and cycles do not require applause. By the end of the night, when the deepest cool has settled and the village has become almost entirely silent, the system is complete. Egypt is not performing, it is maintaining. The night has done what it came to do, quietly setting the stage for morning without claiming authorship. When dawn eventually arrives, people will rise and credit themselves for continuing. The night will not argue. It will already be gone. There are smaller functions too, the ones so ordinary they never get promoted into stories. Night changes how water behaves. Jars left in shade become slightly cooler. People learn where to place drinking water so it does not taste like yesterday's sun. They do not call this science, but it is. The system rewards attention with a body that suffers less. Night changes food as well. Dough left to rest behaves differently in cooler air. Grain stored in a corner loses some of its warmth and settles. Leftovers become safer when insects slow down. Even the act of covering a bowl is a response to night's new rules. Light is managed carefully. A lamp is not simply on or off. It is positioned, shielded from wind, kept low so it does not waste fuel. It is allowed to die at a certain hour because keeping it alive costs more than it returns. These choices form a timetable not written, but shared. Security is handled in layers. Doors are closed not out of panic, but out of habit. Animals are drawn closer. A tool is placed where it can be found in the dark. Someone listens for a sound that does not belong. Yet the village does not stay awake in fear. Night aims for enough caution to allow sleep, not enough vigilance to prevent it. Time becomes different. Without the sun, the village relies on other markers. The position of certain stars, the temperature shift before dawn, the quiet that reaches its deepest point, and then subtly changes. These are not clocks. They are cues, and people learn to read them. The night also creates space for privacy. In daylight, a village is shared visibility. At night, vision collapses. A whispered conversation becomes possible without needing distance. A person can simply be tired without explaining why. Animals understand the system too. Dogs patrol briefly, then rest. Insects choose different paths. Each creature adjusts to the new rules of temperature and visibility. The village is not separate from nature at night. It is embedded in it. Attention behaves differently inside this system. In daylight, it is pulled outward by motion and obligation. At night, it folds back toward the body. A person notices breath, heartbeat, the small ache in a shoulder, the way cool air lands on skin. This inward turn is not philosophy. It is what happens when the world stops demanding constant response. The system makes distraction scarce and makes listening easy. Even thoughts slow, not because problems vanish, but because the night offers fewer cues to chase them. That restraint feels like mercy, even when undeserved. This is why calling night symbolic feels slightly unfair tonight. Symbols are chosen, systems are lived, night is lived. It is the operating mode of the land for a third of every day. Empires can change the language of administration and the names of officials. They cannot change the operating mode. When dawn approaches, the system begins its final transition. The coldest moment passes. Birds test the edges of silence with one sound, then another. The horizon lightens almost imperceptibly. People wake because the mode is flipping back, because tasks will soon become possible again. Night finishes without applause, leaving behind rested bodies and cooled walls, and that is the only proof it ever offers. Sleep arrives without asking whether the world is ready. It does not consult calendars, and it does not wait for political stability. It comes when the body has reached its limit, when muscles have carried enough weight, when the mind has processed as much as it can without losing coherence. In Egypt, around 300 AD, this arrival is neither dramatic nor gentle. It is inevitable. During the day, history feels loud. It moves through markets and roads and official buildings. It leaves marks, makes demands, interrupts routines. But sleep exists below that volume. It is the point where interruption fails. Orders cannot follow a body into unconsciousness. Fear grows tired before sleep does. Even urgency eventually gives up. The body knows when it is time, and it does not negotiate. Eyes grow heavy, not because a person chooses rest, but because the nervous system begins shutting down pathways that are no longer sustainable. Reaction slows. Focus narrows. Thoughts loop without resolution. This is not weakness. It is maintenance asserting itself. In villages across Egypt, sleep arrives unevenly but consistently. Some fall into it early, exhausted by heat and labor. Others linger at the edge, drifting in and out, listening to the last sounds of the night system finishing its work. But eventually everyone crosses the same threshold. Consciousness loosens its grip, not because it trusts the world, but because it can no longer hold itself together. This threshold is where history stops having access. You cannot convince a sleeping body of anything. You cannot threaten it into productivity. You cannot persuade it to stay alert for ideology. Sleep removes the body from participation. It is the most effective withdrawal imaginable. Empires understand this instinctively, which is why they try to regulate sleep. Guards are assigned shifts. Soldiers are trained to resist exhaustion. Messengers are praised for riding through the night. But these efforts always work against the grain of biology, never with it. The cost accumulates quietly, then suddenly. Fatigue does not negotiate terms. In ordinary life, outside institutions of power, no one pretends otherwise. Farmers sleep because tomorrow requires strength. Artisans sleep because hands must remain steady. Caregivers sleep because attention is a finite resource. Children sleep because growth cannot happen any other way. Old bodies sleep because repair takes longer than it used to. These reasons do not need justification. Once sleep deepens, the body enters a space where time behaves differently. Hours pass without awareness. Memories reorganize. Muscles repair tiny damages incurred by work. Hormones rebalance. None of this is visible. None of it is dramatic. Yet without it, nothing else holds. This is what history cannot interrupt. It can delay rest. It can shorten it. It can make it uncomfortable. But it cannot remove the need. Eventually, sleep takes what it requires. Even the most disciplined person will lose coherence without it. Even the most powerful ruler will collapse into it if deprived long enough. In Egypt, sleep is shaped by environment rather than by ideology. People sleep where the air moves, where the ground has cooled, where the house has finished releasing the day. Position matters, timing matters. Ritual does not. There is no single posture that signifies correct sleep. There is only what allows rest to happen. Dreams come and go without being asked. Some are vivid, some forgettable. Some repeat familiar concerns. Others wander through landscapes that never existed. These dreams do not carry messages from the future. They do not reveal destiny. They are the mind's way of sorting what the day left behind. History does not appear here as a narrator. It appears, if at all, as fragments stripped of meaning. The sleeping body is profoundly unproductive in the ways empires measure value. It produces nothing visible. It does not move goods. It does not speak. It does not enforce order. And yet it is the condition that makes all of that possible again in the morning. This contradiction is never resolved. It is simply lived with. Sleep also dissolves identity temporarily. Titles do not matter when consciousness withdraws. Roles fade. The difference between ruler and ruled disappears in the dark interior space where the body is busy repairing itself. Everyone breathes. Everyone twitches. Everyone dreams or does not. The hierarchy collapses for a few hours every night, and no one records this collapse because no one is awake to see it. This nightly suspension is not rebellion. It is not protest. It is biology refusing to be optional. History may frame itself as continuous struggle, but sleep proves that continuity depends on interruption. The day must be broken for life to continue. In the deepest part of the night, when sleep is most complete, Egypt is at its most equal. Villages, fields, desert, and river all exist in a slowed state. The world is not stopped, but it is no longer pushing forward. This pause is not weakness. It is calibration. Animals sleep according to their own patterns, some lightly, some deeply, some with one eye open. They too are subject to the same biological demand. Predators hunt less. Prey conserve energy. The ecosystem breathes more slowly. Night imposes a reduced tempo on everything alive. What makes sleep so powerful is not that it feels good, though sometimes it does. It is powerful because it cannot be fully controlled. Attempts to dominate it always fail eventually. The body will take it back, often at inconvenient times, often without warning. In times of crisis, sleep becomes fragmented. People wake more easily, dreams grow sharper, the body remains alert longer than it should. But even then, sleep does not vanish. It waits. It returns in pieces if necessary. It adapts without surrendering its claim. History can occupy waking hours with narratives of urgency, but it loses its voice when the mind disconnects. No speech reaches a sleeping ear. No decree enters a dreaming mind intact. Sleep is the quietest form of resistance because it does not intend to resist. It simply exists. In Egypt, sleep has been happening long before anyone thought to write about Egypt. It happened before names were carved, before dynasties organized themselves into sequences, before years were counted. It will continue after those records become unreadable. This continuity is not heroic, it is unremarkable. And that is precisely why it endures. When dawn approaches, sleep loosens its hold gradually. The body stirs. Consciousness returns reluctantly. Muscles test themselves. The mind reconnects to memory. History will soon regain access. Tasks will reappear. Roles will reassert themselves. But for several hours each night, sleep removed Egypt from the story. It took the land and its people off stage. It allowed repair without explanation. It allowed forgetting without loss. That is why history could never interrupt it. It depends on it too much. Morning does not arrive as a reward. It does not check whether the night was well spent, whether sleep was deep enough, whether anyone deserves another day. It comes because the earth turns, because light returns, because cycles do not pause to consider effort. In Egypt, around 300 AD, dawn appears without ceremony, and nothing about it asks to be remembered. The first sign is not brightness but change. Darkness thins. The sky shifts from depth to gradation. Shapes begin to reassert themselves, not clearly, but confidently enough to suggest that visibility is returning. This transition is gradual, almost reluctant. The night does not leave abruptly. It recedes the way it arrived, without comment. Air behaves differently now. Coolness lingers, but it no longer deepens. The coldest point has already passed unnoticed. The breeze, if it moves, does so with less purpose. It has finished its work. What remains is a fragile balance that will soon be undone by heat. No one rushes to mark this moment. It is not special. It is expected. In the village, bodies begin to stir without urgency. Sleep loosens its hold slowly. Muscles test themselves. Limbs shift. Eyes open briefly, then close again, negotiating a return to consciousness. The day does not demand immediate attention. It waits, confident that people will come back to it in their own time. Houses respond before people do. Walls that released heat all night begin to absorb again, cautiously at first. Surfaces that felt neutral minutes ago start to change temperature, subtly enough to be ignored. Roofs prepare for exposure. Interiors adjust. The cycle reverses without asking permission. Outside, the land accepts light the way it accepted darkness. Fields brighten unevenly, paths reappear. The desert takes on definition, its openness becoming visible again. Nothing in this process acknowledges yesterday. Nothing promises improvement. It is simply continuation. Birds test the morning with sound, not as a declaration, but as an experiment. One call, then another. Silence answers briefly, then yields. The village remains mostly quiet. People do not respond immediately. They know the day will last long enough without being rushed into. Water reflects the changing sky for a moment, then breaks the reflection as movement resumes. Containers are reached for. A familiar weight is lifted. The body remembers what it needs before the mind organizes reasons. Morning exposes how little credit matters. No dynasty receives applause for the sun rising. No authority can claim responsibility for light. Even the most ambitious systems must wait for conditions they do not control. Work will resume soon, but work does not cause mourning. Mourning permits work. This permission is generous and indifferent. It does not distinguish between tasks. It does not prioritize. It does not favor those with plans over those without them. It offers visibility and warmth to everyone equally, then steps aside. People begin their routines not because morning inspires them, but because habit returns with consciousness. A hand reaches for the same tool it always reaches for. Feet follow familiar paths. Attention shifts outward again, reconnecting to the shared world. The pause of the night has ended, not because it failed, but because it succeeded. What night repaired, morning spends. Energy restored is converted back into movement. Calm is traded for purpose. Silence gives way to sound. None of this is framed as loss. It is exchange. History will resume its noise soon enough. Messages will move, decisions will be made, power will reassert itself through structure and language. But for now, in these early moments, none of that has fully arrived. The day is still forming. It has not yet decided what it will be used for. This is where credit feels especially misplaced. Morning does not mark progress. It marks opportunity. What happens next will be attributed to leaders or systems or events, but the conditions that made action possible will go unmentioned. Light will not be thanked. Cooling will not be acknowledged. Sleep will not be recorded. In Egypt, this pattern has repeated longer than anyone can remember. The river reflects dawn without interpretation. The fields accept light without gratitude. Villages wake without asking who is in charge this year. Life resumes at the scale it always has, one body at a time. The irony is gentle and persistent. Histories will later describe eras, transitions, declines, revivals. They will place weight on dates and names. But the people living through those labels experienced mornings like this one. Quiet, ordinary, unclaimed. Morning makes clear what the night suggested. Continuity does not depend on being remembered, it depends on being repeated. The day does not need a narrative to function. It needs conditions, and those conditions are provided without commentary. As the sun rises higher, heat will build again. The cycle will continue. Night will return when it is time, not when summoned. Egypt will sleep again without permission, and morning will follow, just as uncredited as before. This is not indifference in the moral sense. It is neutrality in the physical sense. The world does not reward or punish based on story. It responds to cycles. Those cycles do not care whether anyone notices them. People will notice outcomes instead, crops growing or failing, bodies strong or tired, tools effective or worn. These outcomes will be explained later in terms of leadership or fortune or fate. Rarely will anyone say that they depended on an unremarkable dawn that arrived on time. The day expands now. Shadows shorten, activity increases, the village becomes visible to itself again, differences reappear, roles reassert. But beneath all of it, the same truth holds. None of this began with intention. It began with light. Morning does not linger to receive thanks. It does not pause to see how it is used. It moves on, becoming day, then heat, then pressure that will eventually produce night again. The cycle does not seek balance. It produces it. Egypt continues, not because it is remembered, but because it wakes, not because it is ruled well, but because it rests when necessary and moves when possible. Morning allows this movement, then disappears into it. Nothing about this needs to be taught. Nothing about it needs to be preserved. It happens whether anyone is ready or not. And so the story ends the way it began, without a name, without a dynasty, with a place waking up, not to history, but to another ordinary day that does not know it will one day be studied.